Welcome to Void of Rules. I was just looking at my channel analytics, and a shocking 85.5% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. If you're enjoying these stories, consider hitting that subscribe button to help me reach 1k subscribers by the end of the year. It costs absolutely nothing, takes just 1 second, and you can always change your mind later. Drop a like on the video too. It really helps with the algorithm. Now let's jump into today's story. The horizon curved gently beneath us as we broke free from Earth's atmosphere. That perfect blue marble, shrinking away minute by minute, reminding me of everything I'd left behind. My daughter Lily's face, wet with tears at the launch site, giving me one last brave thumbs up. The divorce papers, finally signed after months of legal purgatory. My mother's voice over the satellite phone. "Michael, please come back safely." I'd been to space before, 3 rotations on the ISS, 1 lunar orbit mission, but this was different. This was farther, longer, and wrapped in layers of classification that even I, Captain Michael Reynolds, hadn't encountered in my 15 years with NASA. Reynolds, oxygen saturation levels. Commander James Wilson's voice crackled over the comms, breaking my reverie. "Holding steady at 97.8%, I replied, my eyes scanning the control panel of our ship, the Artemis II. The vessel represented the pinnacle of human achievement, a deep space exploration craft designed for the first manned mission to a potentially habitable exoplanet we designated Proxima-b. Dr. Eliza Park floated past me, her slender fingers dancing across a tablet. As our mission biologist, she'd been practically vibrating with excitement since we'd left Earth orbit. "You know they're calling this the most significant journey in human history," she said, not looking up from her calculations. "The first humans to set foot on an exoplanet. The first to potentially encounter extraterrestrial microbiological life." Lieutenant Anna Rodriguez snorted from her engineering station. "If the press knew half of what's in our actual mission brief, they'd be calling it something else." Commander Wilson shot her a warning look. "Lieutenant, protocols." That was the first time I noticed it, the strange tension whenever specifics of our mission came up. We'd been briefed, of course. Proxima-b showed promising signs of habitability. Our mission was to land, collect samples, establish a preliminary research outpost and return. Standard exploration objectives. Yet, something felt off from the beginning. The additional medical screenings, the psychological evaluations that went far beyond standard procedure, the fact that Director Harmon himself had handed each of us a sealed envelope before launch with explicit instructions not to open them until we were 3 months into our journey. "Why not just tell us now?" I'd asked him. Harmon's face had remained impassive. "Some information is best processed when Earth is just another star in the sky, Captain Reynolds." Now, as we accelerated toward our slingshot around Mars, those envelopes sat locked in Wilson's personal safe, a constant reminder of unspoken secrets. The first month passed in the comfortable routine of space travel, systems checks, exercise regimens, scientific preparations. The 4 of us settled into the rhythm of close-quarters living. Wilson was the quintessential commander, former Air Force, with a chest full of medals and a spine made of titanium. He ran the ship with military precision, his salt and pepper hair always regulation short, his quarters immaculate. At our weekly crew dinners, he would occasionally mention his wife Rebecca and their twin sons back in Houston, but always briefly, as if personal connections were luxuries he couldn't afford in deep space. I'd served under him on my last ISS rotation and respected his leadership, even if his by-the-book approach sometimes felt rigid. "The mission comes first," he often said. "Everything else is secondary." Dr. Eliza Park was brilliant, one of the foremost xenobiologists on Earth, with 3 PhDs and a list of academic publications longer than my arm. She was quiet but intense, with a dry wit that emerged in unexpected moments. She'd left behind a research position at MIT and a fiancé who, according to ship gossip, had begged her not to go. But Park couldn't resist the allure of potential alien microbes. "I've spent my life studying the theoretical," she told me once as we shared the observation duty. "Now I might actually touch it." Lieutenant Ana Rodriguez was our engineer and technical specialist, youngest of the crew at 32, with a genius for systems integration and a rebellious streak that had nearly gotten her removed from the mission during training. She kept the Artemis II's complex systems functioning flawlessly, her engineer's mind constantly solving problems before they arose. Rodriguez had grown up in New Mexico, the daughter of migrant workers, and had fought her way through MIT on scholarships and pure determination. The small Mexican flag velcroed to her station was her silent reminder of how far she'd come. "Systems don't lie," was her mantra. "People do." And me? I piloted, monitored, and tried not to think about the life I'd left behind. My marriage to Diane had been dead long before the papers were signed, crushed under the weight of my absences and her resentments. My teenage daughter Lily was the only real casualty, a quiet, artistic girl who had looked at me with a mixture of pride and betrayal when I told her about the mission. "4 years, Dad. I'll be in college when you get back." The endless void outside sometimes felt like a reflection of what waited for me back home. The second month brought our first minor crisis. A micrometeoroid struck the ship's communication array, requiring Rodriguez to perform an unscheduled EVA to repair it. I suited up as her safety, tethered just outside the airlock while she worked on the damaged components. "You know what bugs me about this mission?" she said over our private comms channel, her breath fogging her helmet as she carefully replaced the sheared connection port. "What's that?" The inconsistencies. The mission brief says Proxima-b was discovered 18 months ago, but I worked on propulsion systems for deep space probes 3 years ago that were already targeting it. Her hands never stopped moving, precise despite the bulky gloves. And the redundancies on this ship, they're beyond standard protocol. It's like they're expecting something to go wrong. I watched Earth, now just a bright star among many, and considered her words. Maybe they're just being cautious. It's the farthest human mission in history. Rodriguez snorted. Or maybe they're not telling us everything. She finished the repair and tested the connection. "Communications restored. Let's get back inside. Looking at all these stars is making me dizzy." It was after that repair that I began noticing oddities in our communications with Mission Control. Coded language. References to protocols not in our standard briefing materials. Once, I overheard Wilson in a private channel using phrases that seemed deliberately obscure. "Threshold indicators remain nominal," he had said. "No evidence of Lazarus effect in the crew." When I asked him about it later, he dismissed my concerns. "Just additional monitoring parameters, Reynolds. Nothing that affects your responsibilities." But his eyes told a different story. During the third month, things began to shift subtly. Park spent increasing amounts of time in her lab, running simulations of Proxima-b's environment. She became withdrawn, jumpier. Once, I found her staring at a blank screen, muttering calculations to herself. "Everything okay?" I asked. She startled, then composed herself. "Fine, just thinking about adaptation mechanisms, how life forms might evolve under different conditions than Earth's." She hesitated. "Do you ever wonder what we might really find there, Reynolds? Not just microbes, but something else?" "Like intelligent life." The briefing said spectral analysis showed no signs of technology or civilization. "Not necessarily intelligent, just different. Fundamentally different in ways our science hasn't prepared us for." Rodriguez, meanwhile, had begun keeping a log of what she called system anomalies, minor fluctuations in power, environmental controls, and sensor readings that fell within acceptable parameters, but formed patterns she found suspicious. The ship is talking to us, she insisted when I questioned the value of her obsessive documentation. Something's not right with the Artemis, and I'm going to figure out what it is. Wilson noticed the growing tension. He instituted mandatory recreation periods, movie nights, game tournaments, shared meals where mission talk was forbidden, an attempt at normalcy in the most abnormal of environments. It was during one such dinner, exactly 3 months into our journey, that Wilson finally addressed the sealed envelopes. "Tomorrow," he announced as we finished our meal of reconstituted pasta, 0900 hours, we open the director's packets individually in our quarters. Then we meet to discuss. We all nodded, a strange mix of relief and apprehension settling over the table. Finally, we would have answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bunk, listening to the constant hum of the ship's systems, wondering what secret was so important it had to wait until we were millions of miles from home to be revealed. The next morning, Wilson gathered us in the common area. His face was grave as he retrieved the 4 sealed envelopes from his safe. "As per Director Harmon's instructions, it's time." He handed each of us our respective envelope. "Read them privately, then we'll discuss." My quarters felt suddenly claustrophobic as I broke the seal on my envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, in bold letters, Captain Michael Reynolds, Survival Protocols. Below was a list of rules, each more bizarre than the last. 1. Never look directly at the stars for more than 10 seconds continuously. 2. If you hear knocking from outside the ship, do not respond or investigate. 3. If you see another crew member in 2 places simultaneously, ignore both. 4. Never mention the colour blue aloud after ship's midnight. 5. If your reflection seems delayed by more than half a second, avoid all reflective surfaces for 24 hours. 6. Should any crew member speak in a language you don't recognise, do not attempt to translate or respond. 7. If personal items relocate without explanation, leave them where they are. 8. Should ship systems report the Earth as being in 2 different locations, trust neither. 9. Never sleep with both eyes fully closed. 10. If you begin to feel that this mission has happened before, inform Commander Wilson immediately. 11. Do not acknowledge any communications from Earth that reference coming home early or alternate return protocols. 12. If you find written messages that you don't remember writing, burn them immediately. I read the list 3 times, convinced it was some kind of psychological test or elaborate joke. The paper felt official, NASA letterhead, holographic security seal in the corner, but the content was madness, superstition, folk magic dressed up as protocol. When we reconvened an hour later, the expressions on my crewmates' faces suggested they'd received equally disturbing instructions. "Is this some kind of stress test?" Rodriguez asked, holding her paper like it might bite her. "Or a practical joke?" Wilson's face remained impassive. "These are legitimate protocols based on previous deep space missions. Following them is not optional." "Previous missions?" Park's eyebrows shot up. "There haven't been any previous missions to Proxima-b." "Not to Proxima-b specifically," Wilson conceded, "but into similar conditions." "This is ridiculous," I said, holding up my list. "Never look at stars for more than 10 seconds. We're astronauts. Our job is literally to study celestial bodies." "And never mentioning blue after midnight," Rodriguez added. "What is this, a children's game?" Wilson's expression hardened. "These protocols were developed at significant cost. They are based on empirical evidence and will be followed without question. That's an order." The tension in the room thickened. Park, ever the scientist, tried a different approach. "Commander, we respect your authority, but surely you understand our confusion. Could you provide some context? What evidence supports these protocols?" Wilson hesitated, then sighed. The protocols are derived from incidents during classified missions into deep space. Each rule corresponds to observed phenomena that preceded accidents. What kind of accidents? I pressed. The fatal kind, Wilson said flatly. That's all you need to know for now. Follow the rules. Keep detailed logs of any unusual experiences. Report directly to me if you observe any violations, by yourself or others. With that, he ended the discussion and returned to his duties, leaving the three of us staring at each other in bewilderment. Later, Rodriguez cornered me in the hydroponic garden section. "Did you notice?" she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "We each got different rules. Mine says nothing about stargazing, but I'm not supposed to eat during ship's night cycle or use anyone else's personal items." "How do you know my rules are different?" "I saw your list when you held it up. The first items were completely different from mine." She pulled her own list from her pocket. "Plus, I have 16 rules, not 12 like yours." Over the next few days, we compared notes. Park couldn't speak about her family or wear the colour red. She wasn't allowed to record dreams or use certain numerical sequences in her research. Rodriguez couldn't eat during night hours, use others' belongings, or speak about her childhood home. She was required to wear her watch on her right wrist instead of her left, and had to count aloud while showering. Wilson refused to share his list at all, saying commanding officers had different protocols. The arbitrary nature of it all made it feel like superstition rather than science. "It's psychological," Park theorized during our 4th month in space. We had gathered in her lab while Wilson was occupied with scheduled communications to Earth. NASA wants to study how we respond to irrational demands in isolation. "Then, why would Wilson act like they're legitimate?" I countered. Rodriguez shrugged. "Maybe he's in on it. The authoritarian following pointless rules fits his personality anyway." "Or," Park said, lowering her voice, "maybe something happened on previous missions that they're not telling us about. Something they can't explain scientifically." We fell silent, each contemplating that unsettling possibility. "So what do we do?" Rodriguez finally asked. I looked at the rule list I now carried with me constantly. "We follow the rules for now, but we keep our eyes open, document everything unusual, compare notes, and we watch Wilson." Despite our skepticism, a strange thing happened. We began following the rules, not out of belief, but because the vast emptiness of space has a way of making humans cautious. What harm could come from a bit of superstition when we were hurtling through the void, millions of miles from help? The first incident occurred during our 4th month. I was in the command module when a warning light flashed on Rodriguez's engineering station. Minor oxygen fluctuation in her personal quarters. When I radioed her, she didn't respond. Protocol required investigating any unanswered communications within 5 minutes, so I made my way to her quarters. The corridor seemed longer than I remembered, the emergency lighting casting strange shadows on the walls. I counted my steps, 14 from the junction to her door, when it had always been 12 before. I dismissed it as stress-induced perception error. Her door was locked. I used my override and found the room empty. A half-finished systems diagnostic glowed on her personal tablet. Her bunk was unmade, a book of Garcia Lorca's poetry lying open on the pillow. I found her in the mess hall, eating a sandwich despite it being well into ship's designated night cycle, breaking one of her rules. "Rodriguez, didn't you hear my call?" She looked up, annoyed. "My comm must be malfunctioning. I'm in the middle of dinner." When Wilson arrived moments later, his face darkened. "Lieutenant, ship's time is 0134. You're violating Protocol 6 on your list." "It's just a stupid midnight snack," she snapped, but a flicker of unease crossed her face. "The protocols are nonsense anyway." Wilson's voice was ice. "Return to your quarters immediately. We'll discuss this in the morning." The next day, her personal console malfunctioned. sending incorrect data to the ship's main systems. Her navigation displays showed stars in positions they couldn't possibly occupy. The day after, the air recycling unit near her sleeping quarters began emitting a high-pitched whine that our diagnostics couldn't identify. Rodriguez herself started complaining of vivid nightmares and the sensation of being watched. "I keep dreaming about home," she told me during a maintenance check. "But it's not right. The sky is wrong. The people are waiting for something." She shivered despite the regulated temperature. "And sometimes when I wake up it feels like someone just left the room." "It's just a coincidence," Park insisted when I shared this with her, but she stopped speaking about her family and began wearing only blue and green, avoiding red completely. I found myself avoiding looking at the stars for too long, just in case. By the 5th month, Rodriguez's condition had deteriorated. She became paranoid, insisting someone was entering her quarters while she slept. She accused each of us, at different times, of sabotaging her equipment. Dark circles formed under her eyes as she stopped sleeping, almost entirely. "There's something out there," she told me during a quiet moment on watch. "Sometimes I hear it, like fingernails on the hull, tap, 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 asking to be let in." Before I could respond, a proximity alarm blared. Something had registered on our sensors, then vanished. Wilson ordered a full systems diagnostic, which revealed nothing, but Rodriguez's wild-eyed "I told you so" expression haunted me. The next morning, I found Park in the observation dome, staring at the endless starfield. Something about her posture seemed wrong. Too still, too attentive. "Park," I said quietly, "you've been looking at the stars for more than 10 seconds. She didn't turn. "They're speaking to each other, Reynolds. Did you know that? Photons entangled across millions of light years, carrying information we can't begin to comprehend." I gently pulled her away from the viewport. Her eyes, when they finally met mine, seemed different somehow. The pupils too large, the irises almost vibrating with intensity. "I had a dream last night," she whispered. "I was back in my lab at MIT, but all my colleagues were empty, walking around with nothing inside them, and something was looking through their eyes, studying me." She gripped my arm. "What if we're not going to Proxima-b to find life? What if something from Proxima-b is already finding us?" I reported the incident to Wilson, who immediately ordered Park to undergo a medical evaluation. The tests showed nothing physically wrong, but he restricted her access to the observation dome nonetheless. That evening, during dinner, Rodriguez suddenly looked up from her plate. "Does anyone else hear that?" We fell silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the usual ship sounds. Air circulation, the faint hum of electronics, the occasional ping of cooling metal. Then, faintly, a rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on metal, coming from the exterior hull. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Wilson's face paled. Micrometeoroid impacts, nothing unusual. But the ship's sensors showed no impacts, no debris, nothing outside at all. 3 days later, the tapping returned. This time, Rodriguez violated another rule. While we were all in the command module, she grabbed a communication headset and began broadcasting on an open channel. "Who's out there? We can hear you." The moment the words left her mouth, every system on the ship flickered. Lights, computers, environmental controls, all shutting down for exactly 3 seconds before restoring. Wilson was furious. "Lieutenant, you've directly violated protocol. Report to your quarters immediately." "Something's out there," she shouted back, "and you know it. All these rules, they're to keep it from noticing us, aren't they? Well, it's too late. It's already here." In the ensuing argument, no one noticed what I saw on my monitor, a momentary duplication in the ship's external camera feed. For just a second, there were 2 Artemis IIs shown, perfectly identical, floating side by side in the void. That night, Rodriguez's screams echoed through the ship. By the time we forced open her quarters, the screaming had stopped. The room was empty, not just of Rodriguez, but of any sign she'd ever been there. Her personal items, photos, clothes, the small Mexican flag she'd brought from home, were arranged in a perfect circle on the floor. The bed was made, the walls were bare. The ship's cameras showed her entering her quarters alone. They never showed her leaving. Wilson sealed the room and declared Rodriguez missing in action. His voice never wavered as he reminded us of the importance of following our rules. "What happened to her?" Park demanded, her scientific composure cracking. "People don't just disappear in sealed environments." "Lieutenant Rodriguez violated multiple protocols despite clear warnings," Wilson replied mechanically. "The consequences were unfortunate but not unexpected." "Consequences?" I echoed. "What exactly are these rules protecting us from, Commander?" Wilson's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw fear there. "You don't want to know, Reynolds. Just follow the rules." I couldn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Rodriguez's face, her eyes wide with terror as she screamed into the void. I began sleeping with one eye partially open, as my rules dictated. The ship felt different after Rodriguez vanished. Corridors seemed to stretch longer than they should. Rooms appeared slightly larger or smaller, depending on the time of day. Once, I could have sworn I saw her reflection in a console screen standing behind me, her mouth moving in silent warning. When I turned, there was nothing there. Park threw herself into research, secretly analysing the rules pattern. 2 weeks after Rodriguez's disappearance, she called me to her lab while Wilson was sleeping. "Look at this," she said, showing me her tablet. I cross-referenced our rules with historical protection rituals across human cultures. There are similarities, patterns that appear in everything from ancient Egyptian burial practices to medieval European folklore about liminal spaces. Rules about reflections, about counting, about not acknowledging certain phenomena. She pulled up another file. And then there's this. She'd managed to access a hidden database in the ship's system, mission logs classified at the highest level. Missions with names like Deep Reach, Threshold, and Lazarus, all sent to regions of space near our current trajectory, all ending in disaster. "These aren't the first crews sent out here," Park whispered, "and the rules, they're not psychological tests, they're derived from survivor testimonies." I scrolled through the heavily redacted files, my heart pounding. Phrases jumped out at me: cognitive contamination, perceptual anomalies, non-Euclidean manifestation, crew susceptibility factors. If NASA knew these missions were dangerous, why send another one? Park's eyes met mine. Because something out here is worth the risk. Something they want badly enough to sacrifice astronauts for. I thought of Rodriguez, of her perfect circle of possessions, of the strange tapping on the hull, of corridors that changed length and reflections that moved too slowly. "We need to confront Wilson," I said finally. "No more evasions." We found the commander in his quarters, methodically organising and reorganising his personal items in precise geometric patterns. He didn't seem surprised to see us. "You found the files?" he said flatly. It wasn't a question. "You knew what we were flying into," I accused. "You knew the danger, and you said nothing." Wilson sighed, suddenly looking much older than his 52 years. "You weren't supposed to know until we arrived. Until we passed the point of no return." He gestured for us to sit. "The anomaly was discovered 15 years ago, a region of space where the laws of physics bend, where impossible things become possible." He rubbed his eyes. "The first mission discovered it by accident. One survivor returned, raving about entities that exist beyond human comprehension. The second mission was sent to investigate. 3 survivors that time, each with stories about protection rituals they'd developed, behaviours that seemed to ward off whatever exists out there." "So the rules," I began, are all we have against something we don't understand, Wilson finished. Each subsequent mission refined them, identified patterns of safety. The rules are different for each person because the entity or entities interact differently with different human minds. And our real mission? Park asked. Contact, Wilson said simply. Controlled, prepared contact with a non-human intelligence. Something that might exist outside our understanding of reality itself. Something that could revolutionize human understanding of the universe if we can survive encountering it. Rodriguez, I whispered. Broke the rules, Wilson nodded. And they noticed her. They? Park pressed. Wilson's expression became distant. We don't have language for what they are. Not entity, not being, not phenomenon. They exist in the spaces between conventional reality. The closest analogy might be higher dimensional beings perceiving our three-dimensional space. They see us completely, but we only perceive the parts of them that intersect with our reality. And they're hostile? I asked. Not intentionally. They're curious. They study us, interact with us. But their interaction is incompatible with our form of consciousness. Imagine an entomologist trying to study an ant colony, but accidentally crushing some ants in the process. He shrugged. The lucky ones just disappear. The unlucky ones change. The revelation should have terrified us, but instead it brought clarity. The rules weren't arbitrary. They were armor against the incomprehensible. We followed them religiously as we continued toward our destination. But Park was already compromised. During our confrontation with Wilson, she'd accidentally mentioned her brother's name, breaking one of her rules. Within days, strange things began happening around her. She would appear in rooms before entering them. Her research became increasingly brilliant but filled with references to concepts none of us understood. Equations that seemed to solve themselves. Biological theories that contradicted known science yet yielded correct predictions. I found her one night speaking softly to an empty chair in the lab. Anna was right, she told me when I approached. They're curious about us. They don't mean harm. They just don't understand what harm is to us. Who are you talking to? Park smiled. She never left, Michael. None of them ever leave. They just expand, become more than they were. She held up her hand, and for a sickening moment I thought I saw through it. Not transparency, but as if her hand extended into spaces I couldn't properly perceive. I'm beginning to understand now. Reality isn't what we think it is. It's so much more. Park, you need to rest. You're suffering from the same thing that affected Rodriguez. Her smile widened. Rodriguez isn't suffering. She's transcending. And soon I will too. She leaned closer. They've shown me things, Michael. The structure beneath reality. The patterns that hold everything together. And the spaces between those patterns. Where they live. Where we could live if we let go of our limited perception. I reported the conversation to Wilson, who prescribed a mild sedative for Park and restricted her lab access. But it was already too late. Her transformation had begun. The next morning, I found Wilson in the command module, staring at the ship's external cameras with a look of horrified fascination. On the screen was nothing I could adequately describe. A distortion in space, like heat waves but more substantial. A folding of reality around a point that seemed to recede infinitely inward, while simultaneously extending outward. They're getting closer, Wilson murmured. The rules aren't working as well now. They've found us. That evening, during what should have been Park's sleep cycle, alarms blared throughout the ship. Atmospheric breach in the laboratory section. By the time we arrived in pressurized suits, the emergency bulkheads had sealed, preventing decompression of the entire deck. Through the reinforced viewport in the lab door, we could see Park standing calmly in the now airless room, surrounded by swirling papers and floating equipment. She should have been dead, explosive decompression without a suit is fatal within seconds. Instead, she turned to us and smiled. Her skin had taken on a strange luminous quality, and her movements were too fluid, as if she had additional joints or her body wasn't entirely solid. "It's beautiful out here," her voice somehow reached us through the vacuum. "You should join us." As we watched in horror, she walked calmly through the airlock without cycling it and into the void of space. The external cameras showed nothing. She was simply gone. Wilson ordered me to help him seal Park's quarters. Like Rodriguez's, they were untouched, except for a perfect circle of personal items on the floor. In the center of the circle was a notebook open to a page containing a single sentence written over and over. "The spaces between are full." With only Wilson and myself remaining, the Artemis II continued its journey. The commander became increasingly ritualistic, checking and rechecking his personal rules, muttering to himself during shifts. I maintained my duties, never looking at stars for too long, sleeping with one eye partially open, avoiding my reflection when it seemed a half-second too slow. The tapping on the hull became a nightly occurrence. Sometimes it would form patterns. 3 quick taps, 3 slow, 3 quick again. Classic SOS. Other times it would mirror the rhythm of my heartbeat exactly, which was somehow more disturbing. The ship systems began exhibiting more frequent anomalies. Gravity fluctuations, temperature variances. Once, for exactly 12 minutes, all the water on board flowed upward, defying artificial gravity before returning to normal behavior. The navigation system would occasionally show us traveling in the opposite direction, then correct itself without explanation. And there were other, more subtle changes. Food that tasted like memories. A standard protein bar suddenly carrying the exact flavor of my mother's apple pie. Shadows that moved independent of their sources. The distinct feeling of being watched while I slept. I began keeping a journal, documenting everything. If I didn't make it back, at least there would be a record. Evidence of what we'd encountered. As Proxima-b finally came into view, Wilson's behavior became more secretive. I caught him speaking to empty rooms. His logs contained references to the contact protocol and ascension. During a routine maintenance check, I discovered a hidden transmission array. Wilson had been sending messages towards the exoplanet for weeks. Not standard NASA communications, but patterns of mathematical symbols and musical tones that made my skin crawl when I played them back. That same night, I found a data drive hidden in Park's abandoned lab. Her final message was simple. "They're already here with us. Wilson made contact months ago. Don't trust what looks like him." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I began watching the commander, cataloguing inconsistencies, the way he sometimes took too long to respond to questions, how he occasionally stared at his hands as if unfamiliar with them, his sudden knowledge of advanced physics concepts no human should understand. Once, I saw him standing in the hydroponics bay, gently touching the leaves of our small garden. As I watched from the doorway, his fingers seemed to sink into the plant matter, not damaging it, but passing through it as if testing the boundaries between substances. When he noticed me, he quickly withdrew his hand and left without speaking. Another time, I overheard him in the communications room, transmitting a message using Rodriguez's voice, a perfect imitation that sent chills down my spine. "Preparation almost complete," the Rodriguez voice said. "Final subject exhibits strong resistance but shows potential for complete integration. Arrival estimated in 14 standard days." During pre-landing preparations, I discovered the truth. While checking emergency equipment in the rarely used lower storage bay, I found a body, Commander James Wilson, dead for what appeared to be weeks, his face frozen in an expression of wonder and horror. The cold had preserved him, preventing decomposition, but there was no question. He had been dead while something wore his appearance, gave his orders, continued his mission. When I returned to the command module, Not Wilson was waiting. "You weren't supposed to find that yet," it said, its voice suddenly different, layered with harmonics, impossible for human vocal cords. We still had much to learn. "What are you?" I managed to ask. The thing wearing Wilson's face smiled. "Curious, as you are. Your species sends metal shells into the void, seeking others, yet you fear what you might find." It moved closer, its movements too smooth, like animation with too many frames per second. "We've been studying you, learning how your minds work, the patterns that make you stable." "The rules?" "Cognitive anchors," it nodded. "Your minds can't perceive us without them. Reality becomes fluid. Some of your kind adapt better than others." "Park and Rodriguez?" "Changed. Not gone, never gone. Just existing differently now." It tilted its head, the gesture uncannily bird-like. "They found it difficult at first, the transition, the expansion, but now they understand. Now they see." "See what?" "Everything." A simple word, but the way it said it carried impossible weight. All possibilities, all configurations, all times at once. It offered me knowledge, understanding beyond human comprehension, the secrets of existence, the true nature of reality. All I had to do was allow the change, allow them in. In that moment, I thought of Lily, of Earth, of humanity, continuing in blissful ignorance of what waited in the darkness between stars. I activated the emergency landing abort sequence. The entity's expression changed, Wilson's features contorting into something almost but not quite human. "You deny evolution?" Ship systems began failing as I rerouted power to the emergency systems. Warning lights flashed across every console. The hull groaned as though under immense pressure. Manifestations appeared. Rodriguez at her engineering station, smiling too widely, her eyes reflecting stars that weren't visible from our position. Park in her lab coat, her form shifting slightly each time I blinked, growing additional fingers with each iteration, both beckoning, both wrong in subtle ways I couldn't articulate. Their voices overlapped, promising safety if only I would land on the planet below. "The next stage waits," Rodriguez's voice, but deeper, resonant in impossible ways. "Humanity evolving." "The patterns make sense when you see them all at once," Park's voice, but with echoes, preceding the words instead of following them. "Pain is just perspective, Michael. Limited perspective." The ship shuddered violently as I manually overrode the navigation systems. Proxima-b loomed large in the view screen, beautiful and terrible. I could see structures on its surface now, impossible architectures that shifted as I watched them. Buildings that were also organisms, mountains that were also machines, a civilization unbound by the linear constraints of human perception. As warnings blared and systems failed around me, I discovered the final rule hidden in an encrypted file in the ship's mainframe. Only one may return. Understanding bloomed. The entity couldn't be defeated or escaped, only redirected. A sacrifice was needed. I activated the ship-splitting protocol, emergency measure designed to separate the command module as an escape pod from the main vessel. As the countdown began, I glimpsed my reflection in the dark. In the darkened view screen. It smiled at me before I smiled, its eyes filled with something ancient and patient. A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. Had I been compromised already? Was I making this decision of my own will, or was I being subtly guided? No time to consider. The escape pod ejected with a violent jolt, the explosive bolts firing in sequence to separate the command module from the main vessel. Through the viewport, I watched the main section of the Artemis II descend toward Proxima-b, carrying what looked exactly like Captain Michael Reynolds on its final journey. The duplicate me turned just before the ship separated completely, our eyes meeting across the void. It raised its hand in farewell, the gesture almost tender. Then something happened to the space around the main vessel, a folding, a bending of light and matter that my human brain couldn't properly process. The ship seemed to stretch, to exist in multiple configurations simultaneously before vanishing in a flash that wasn't quite light. The escape pod's emergency FTL drive activated automatically, the stars blurring around me as it executed its pre-programmed return trajectory. The sudden acceleration slammed me back into my seat, and darkness claimed me. I dreamed of spaces between spaces, of geometries that couldn't exist in 3 dimensions, of beings that perceive time as we perceive height, just another axis to move along freely. They spoke to me without words, sharing concepts my sleeping mind could almost grasp, but my waking mind would reject. "We mean no harm," they seemed to say. "We only wish to share existence." "But you took them," my dream self replied. "Rodriguez, Park, Wilson." "Took? No, expanded, enhanced. They live more fully now than human limitations allowed, as will you in time." I escaped. Something like laughter rippled through the non-space around me. No one escapes. Some merely take longer to arrive. I jolted awake to blinding light and the sound of human voices. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. Then, reality reasserted itself. Medical bay. Earth. People in hazmat suits hovering around me. "Captain Reynolds," a voice called. "Can you hear me? You're safe now. You're home." Home. The word seemed strange, distant. I'd been gone, how long? The mission chronometer had shown just over 8 months when I'd activated the escape protocol, but the faces around me looked different somehow. Older. "How long?" I croaked, my voice rusty from disuse. A pause. 3 years, Captain. You've been gone for 3 years. That was impossible. The Artemis II had been exactly on schedule when I'd initiated the emergency return. I tried to sit up, but restraints held me in place. "Standard quarantine procedure," someone explained, "until we can clear you medically." I was in quarantine for 6 weeks. They told me the Artemis II had sent automated distress signals before all contact was lost, that the escape pod's emergency beacon had activated suddenly, nearly 3 years after launch, deep in our solar system's Kuiper belt. That I was the only survivor of what they were calling a tragic mission failure. The debriefings were extensive. Teams of scientists, military personnel, and NASA officials questioned me for hours each day. I told them everything. The rules, the disappearances, the entity that had taken Wilson's form. Most looked skeptical, some looked afraid. A few seemed almost excited. Director Harmon himself conducted the final debriefing, his face older and more lined than I remembered. "Your account matches certain theories we had about the anomaly," he said carefully. "But without corroborating evidence, we can't confirm what exactly happened out there. The ship's logs. The escape pod's data was corrupted during the return journey. Radiation damage, most likely." His expression gave nothing away. "Officially, the Artemis II mission was lost due to catastrophic systems failure. The details you've provided will be classified at the highest level." When we finished, he handed me a sealed envelope, identical to the one I'd received on the ship 3 years earlier. "New protocols," he said quietly, "for your protection back on Earth." Inside was a new list of rules, behaviors to follow, actions to avoid, ways to ensure that whatever I'd encountered stayed far from our world, or at least from my perception of it. 1. Never look at the night sky for more than 30 seconds. 2. Avoid reflective surfaces during the hour before dawn. 3. If you see anyone from the Artemis II crew, do not acknowledge them. 4. Count your fingers twice before making any important decision. 5. If electronic devices activate without input, leave the area immediately. 6. Never sleep in a room with open curtains or blinds. 7. If you dream of space, record the dream but never read what you've written. 8. Avoid anyone who mentions the spaces between in casual conversation. 9. If you feel you're being observed while alone, recite the first 9 prime numbers. 10. Should you begin to perceive more than 3 spatial dimensions, contact the emergency number immediately. I live quietly now, in a small house by the ocean provided by NASA's Veteran Care Program. The waves help mask the tapping I sometimes hear on my bedroom window at exactly 3:17 each morning. I visit Lily on weekends. She's in college now, studying astrophysics ironically enough. I follow my rules with religious devotion, and I try not to notice how sometimes my reflection moves a half-second too late, or how the stars seem to pulse with meaning when I accidentally look at them too long. I try not to hear the whispers that sometimes precede people's words, or see the subtle distortions in space around certain objects. Most of all, I try not to think about what returned in the escape pod, wearing Captain Michael Reynolds' face, carrying Captain Michael Reynolds' memories, loving his daughter with Captain Michael Reynolds' heart. But in unguarded moments, I wonder about the duplicate me that went down to Proxima-b, about what it found there, or what found it, about whether it was truly a duplicate, or if something had been inside me all along, guiding my actions, waiting for the right moment to separate and pursue its true purpose. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I remember the entity's final words before the ship split apart. You cannot leave us behind. We are curious. We are learning. We are becoming. And I wonder what exactly it is I've brought back to Earth, because there are moments, brief, terrifying moments, when my perception shifts, when I see the spaces between things, teeming with presence, when everyday objects reveal complex geometries extending beyond their apparent boundaries, when time seems less like a river and more like an ocean, with currents and depths and creatures moving beneath the surface. In those moments, I understand what Park meant about the patterns making sense when seen all at once. I glimpse the structure beneath reality, the vast, intricate framework upon which our limited perception hangs its illusions of solidity and sequence, and I feel them watching me, waiting, patient beyond human comprehension. Last week, I found a note on my kitchen table, written in my handwriting, though I had no memory of writing it. The integration continues, the vessel is prepared. We are almost ready to welcome them properly. I burned it immediately, as per Rule 12. Yesterday I saw Rodriguez at a coffee shop. She looked exactly as she had on the ship, down to the mission patch on her jacket. When our eyes met, she smiled, a smile too wide and too knowing, before fading into the crowd. This morning I counted my fingers and found 11 on my right hand. When I blinked, there were 5 again. The rules are failing. Whatever came back with me, whatever I brought back or whatever I've become, is growing stronger. The barriers between their perception and ours are thinning. I should contact the emergency number, follow protocol, protect humanity from whatever is unfolding. But more and more, I find myself wondering, is it really something to fear? Expansion, evolution, transcendence beyond the limited dimensions of human existence. The ability to perceive all possibilities at once, to move through time as easily as space, to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Perhaps Rodriguez and Park weren't victims. Perhaps they were pioneers. Tonight, I'll sit on my porch and look at the stars for more than 30 seconds. I'll allow the tapping at my window to continue without reciting the prime numbers. I'll read back the dreams I've recorded about space, and I'll wait to see what comes through the spaces between, because the final rule on my list, the one I never told NASA about, the one that appeared on the back of the paper the morning after I returned, written in a script that was almost but not quite English. When you are ready to see everything, break all previous rules in sequence, and we will welcome you home. I think I'm finally ready to go home.